All right, get this. Taxpayers, they've given Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac over $169 billion just to stay afloat. And despite the cash infusion, both companies are still deeply in the red. The Cato Institute's Director of Financial Studies, Mark Calabria, he's just done a study on how that money could have been spent in a lot of ways that would have been much better for taxpayers and America. And he joins us now. Mark, welcome to the show.
Charles, it's great to be here.
It's $169 billion and counting. Give us an example of how that would have been better spent.
Well, and I want to emphasize, what I decided to do is try to look at alternatives. I'm not necessarily advocating these alternatives, but really just to try to illustrate how we could have spent the money. And for instance, earlier, we could have bought every homeless person in America a house. We could have spent $110,000 on every homeless person, ended homelessness. We could have ended poverty for a year. We could have bought a free
wait. Don't go too fast, Mark. I'm trying to digest the first one, okay? Listen, really, that's a mind-boggling thing when you say we could have. Every homeless person in America could be in a house right now for what we've given to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Absolutely, and that would have, in my opinion, done more for the housing market, too, than what we decided to do.
Yeah, we'd have taken some inventory off, right?
Absolutely, and if you wanted to continue on a housing along, we could have given every renter in America $5,000 toward a down payment instead of bailing out Freddie and Fannie. So many of these things would have done more for the housing market. They would have been a better use of the funds, and of course the bailouts have not ended. We'll ultimately spend probably $300 billion on Freddie and Fannie before it's all over with. And obviously, this is money pulled out of the private sector that's costing jobs, that's destroying wealth. But again, we could have spent it on a number of other things that would have done far more for the economy and done far more for American families.
Mark, the people that are taking our money, our taxpayer money, and giving it, just pouring it into Fannie and Freddie, what's their rationale for doing that?
Well, I think some of the rationale is, we need to protect the housing market. We need to keep up housing prices. We need to protect Freddie and Fannie debt because with a wink and a nod, Treasury secretaries from Geithner to Polson have all promised that Freddie and Fannie debt was backed by the government. So there certainly is a concern that if we don't back Freddie and Fannie debt, then somehow there'll be questions raised about the Treasury debt, despite the fact that everybody today wants Treasury debt because everything else looks risky. So again, there's just concern about protecting Treasuries, protecting the integrity of the American capital markets, and of course protecting the housing market. But again, there are other ways to do that. There are cheaper ways to do that. As I mentioned, we could have just subsidized renters and homeless, and we could have helped people on the bottom who are really in need, rather than the massive subsidies that Freddie and Fannie mostly go to those at the top. It's really the wealthy who benefit from Freddie and Fannie. Those are very large houses. Half of homeowners, don't even have mortgages, or rather it's a third of homeowners don't have mortgages. They don't get any benefit from Freddie and Fannie. So again, having these other alternatives on the table really could have done more for the housing market, but we could have done more for the economy in general, putting this money to other uses.
Mark, there's been a lot of talk since this whole housing thing began, and that we probably shouldn't have a Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that they've been tools from both sides of the aisle to give out political favors, and that maybe it would be the best thing for our housing market if we got rid of them. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. We need to get to a point where the private sector, where the people who take the upside also take the downsides, that the taxpayer is not left holding up the bag. It's important to keep in mind, this is not the first time. After the savings and loan crisis, the taxpayer was hit with a $150 billion bill then. So again, if we don't do something about Freddie and Fannie today, the next time the housing market goes boom and bust, we will be hit with an even bigger bill. And again, that's important to keep these other alternatives in mind, because if we don't get rid of Freddie and Fannie, we are explicitly saying we don't want to do any of these other things because we're going to spend the money on the next bailout.
I got to tell you, too, and the renters in this country, they get the shaft on everything.
Absolutely.
It would have been amazing. Listen, I'm not, and to your point, it's not about advocating these positions, but if you said, okay, let's make a deal. These are the doors. The last door anybody would pick is just pouring this money down this dark hole where we don't see hardly any benefit so far. Mark Calabria from the Cato Institute. Great work as usual, man. We appreciate it.